Memes spread for their own benefit. They spread sometimes by being good, true, useful, beautiful, and they sometimes spread despite not being any of those things, but for other reasons. And that's the balance that we're always trying to strike in human culture, to try and actually choose the memes that are true and that are good for us, but we don't always succeed.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Chasing Consciousness. So today we have the slightly disconcerting ideas of memetic theory to get our heads around as we learn how successful ideas and information are replicated by humans and then retransmitted back out into the world. We'll see how these memes evolve our culture and minds over time, similarly to how genes evolve through natural selection. But concerns will arise when we realize that this replication is not only selected for memes that are good for human evolution. And so memes seem to take on their own special kind of evolutionary survival. Then, when we find ourselves in an internet era with AI algorithms replicating ideas in an artificially amplified feedback loop with our own human memes, we get a cultural runaway train in which we're really not in control of our culture or ideas anymore. So fortunately, to get our head around this tough topic, we have one of the inventors of the field, the author of the 1999 book, The Meme Machine, and by now in her third appearance on Chasing Consciousness, our in-house skeptic, psychologist, philosopher, broadcaster, and author, Susan Blackmore. Best known for her books Zen and the Art of Consciousness, Consciousness and Introduction, and Seeing Myself, Sue's work spans across hundreds of publications in over 20 different languages and making big contributions in the field of psychology, memetics, religion, philosophy of mind, supernatural experiences, and anomalous experiences. Now, I've been wanting to speak to Sue about these topics ever since studying the way AI algorithms pick up trending memes, amplifying their signal regardless of the content. So I just can't wait to get into this. So without further ado, let's go. So Sue Blackmore, welcome back to Chasing Consciousness. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. Thank you very much. It's fun to see you there looking very smiley and in your black and white.
Listeners, you must go back and listen to my previous interviews with Sue. One on the hard problem of consciousness, that was actually the first episode of the podcast, and one on free will, both incredibly informative. I hope you don't mind, Sue. I've started to call you my in-house skeptic because your open yet skeptical approach just keeps my thinking clear as I sort of start to consider more and more anomalous phenomena. I know you've studied them a lot.
I like that idea. I'm slightly worried about what sort of house I'm being invited into, but if I can increase skepticism in the sense of doubt, inquiry, wonder, worrying about things we don't understand, then good.
That's exactly all of the above, precisely.
Right.
With your permission, Sue, I want to dive straight into our topics for today because I know you've got limited time and I just really want to leave enough time after genes and memes to link them with your work on technology and AI. So,
Right.
Firstly, memetic theory. You kind of kick-started this field over 25 years ago with your 1999 book, The Meme Machine. So while genes replicate successful biology, memes replicate successful ideas and stories. And in that way, the evolution of memes kind of builds on top of the evolution of genes.
Yeah.
Now, I guess this goes right back to primitive Homo sapiens times, no? Because we just, at that time, we were developing our capacity for conceptual construction. Maybe we can start there, Sue, just by giving us a few examples from throughout history that can illustrate how memes work.
Right. That's a very important but tricky question because we don't really know when it started. You're putting the start on conceptual thinking and so on, which I think most people do. But from the memes point of view, what's critical is the ability to copy, or more generally, to imitate. So let's just track back a bit about the basis of genes and memes. it all comes down to Darwin's idea of natural selection. So in terms of genes, they are information that is copied with variation and selection. That's what's called the evolutionary algorithm. And the brilliant thing about Darwin is when you understand natural selection, you realize it has to be true. It's not, you don't need the evidence, although there's so much evidence, but you don't need that. When you realize that if anything is copied and the copies all vary a bit, and then only the best ones, whatever that means, only some of them get selected to be copied again, then change happens inevitably. And that change is directed by the selection process, what's selected. So in terms of biology, the trees that outperform the other trees, they're the ones who then have their genes passed on. Same with animals and with us. So the same then applies to memes. They're also information which is copied with variation and selection. But in this case, as you mentioned, it's behaviors, ideas, constructions, ways of doing things, technologies. And that's what we're talking about. So almost every other creature on this planet is not capable of imitation. There are some examples, bird song, song in whales and dolphins and so on. There may be others. Some other apes can imitate a bit. But where I'm putting the beginning, to answer your question, is when our ancestors began to copy each other's behavior or sounds or whatever, actions, with sufficient accuracy, fidelity, that this whole process of natural selection would work. Only instead of natural selection on things dying, it's natural selection on ideas dying. So if you think about something like lighting fires, on the whole, other apes, they don't spontaneously light fires, and they're very, very bad at actually learning how to do it from anyone else. But that must have happened early on in modern human evolution, that people began to make fires. Then they began to make tools and cut stones to make sharp edges, and all of those kinds of things would require imitation. It was incredibly slow to begin with. But that's where I'm putting the beginning from the memetic point of view, and that's one of the main arguments in my book, as you say, 25 years ago, God, that's where humanity diverged from every other creature on this planet was not because we're more intelligent, rather the intelligence came because we could imitate. And that means we can share the ideas and everybody gets a share in all the other ideas. And the ideas that get copied more for whatever reason, doesn't matter why, it might be because they're useful, it might be because we like them, they might be useless and dangerous, like believing in God and things like that. But anyway, whatever the reasons, they get passed on and that builds our culture. So that's where I put the beginning.
And I imagine that our species' unique use of complex language was the ultimate replicator in a way, because words are easier to copy and imitate than, say, images or movements. Is that right? Tell us where language
Well, I would say, yeah, it's really important. Very good question. I don't know that they're easier, but they will have become easier. So there's a lot of research, not within memetics, but a lot of other research on the evolution of language. So we know quite a lot about how it evolved, beginning probably with making sounds that sound like what you can make a sort of cat noise and it's like a cat or, those sort of things. But then there's pointing, and this is really important. Dogs can follow pointing, cats can't, I think. I mean, I don't know exactly which species can do it, but humans, young kids will start following when you point. They look where you're looking, not at your finger. And that's important because then you make a noise, you point at something and you go boom, and that thing over there becomes a boom. And then it can build up from there. There have been some wonderful experiments called the talking heads with simple robots that would highlight something and make a noise, and then another one would copy them and do the same noise. And then some of the noises would spread better than others because they were easier for these robots to produce or because they were more helpful for whatever they're doing. And that's the way that I think language would have taken off. And then intelligence follows because with language, you can transmit so much. You can correct people in their copying your activities. You can say, no, don't do the fire like that. You need this kind of, whatever. And you can elaborate it. And so language gets richer and richer as you go on. And that began to happen pretty fast compared with the very slow changes over thousands, tens of thousands of years in tool use and so on. I think once it takes off, the whole thing, both in biological evolution and in memetic evolution, and I think now in other kinds of evolution, it starts very, very slowly and it speeds up and speeds up.
And presumably the more complex versions of that, theories, treaties, entire complex connections of ideas coming together. They're just we need language so much to communicate something that complex. I mean, is it too much to say it's the ultimate replicator?
What language?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how ultimate you go. There might be other things way out in the
Well, we're going to
universe or
get
whatever.
somewhere close to that towards the end of the conversation. But
Yes,
just in terms of our history, it seems
yes,
like it's that really made the difference. Am I exaggerating?
yes. Because as in the example that I just gave, language enables you to make more accurate the other things you're copying. And you mentioned treatises and so on. We'll think about books, how much information there is in a book. Think about a bookshop, or think about Amazon books or any other online bookstore. There will be some books that there's the list, isn't there? The ranking, Um, some books are bought in their millions, and others are bought in their hundreds, and some are not bought at all. And this is going very, very fast now. And some podcasts are watched by lots of people, and some are not.
Mm.
And why? Because somebody watches this and they think, isn't he great? Isn't he answering brilliant questions? What a great podcast. I'll tell my friends about it. And others don't. So all of this depends on language. Yeah.
But something super complex, like let's say quantum theory, which
Yeah.
is a mixture of equations and explanations. Is quantum theory a meme, or is it a bunch of memes? How do we separate when we get to that kind of level of complexity?
Okay. A bunch of memes is called a memeplex, with analogy to co-adaptive gene complex, where certain genes kind of hang out together and are always passed on together. I think the same thing goes for memplexes. So religions are an absolute classic memplex. If you believe in the Virgin Mary and the ascension of Christ into heaven and so on, then you probably also believe in, I don't know, whatever else, um, the Trinity and all that. And if you believe in Allah, you'll believe in different things. Those are memplexes. Now, quantum theory, you pick a very interesting one there, because why does quantum theory spread? Well, amongst physicists and mathematicians who spend years and years learning, starting with Schrodinger's equations or whatever, and the different interpretations of quantum mechanics, and really study that and get involved. That's a lifetime of study. And to a large extent, this is a scientific and mathematical endeavor in which the memes or the memplexes that succeed within quantum theory are the ones that actually do best at making predictions, because this is the whole point of science. So if you take some quantum theory or relativity, and they at the moment are incompatible, and you make predictions from those, the versions or the equations or the structures that make the best predictions that actually come out right will be passed on more, and other versions will die out. But why I say quantum theory, you've picked a good one here, is because, God, I do a lot of studying of consciousness, and people love quantum theories of consciousness. These are people who know nothing about the equations. They do not even know what quantum theory is about. They don't even know what the word quantum bit means. And yet somehow it has this magical appeal. So quantum theories of consciousness are so popular compared with the difficult philosophical alternatives, which people really struggle with and have to know an awful lot of philosophy before they can understand them. So this is a brilliant example of how memes spread, not necessarily because they're good or true or beautiful or good for us, but because for some reason they've got what it takes to get somebody to copy them. And in the case of quantum theory, it's both extremes.
And that's exactly where we're going to get to in a minute. But there's just one thing I want to clarify before we get to some of these concerns. So this evolutionary algorithm, as you call it, requires selection and replication to run. And when it runs, new designs emerge. And
Yeah.
so the emergent designs of memetic evolution are a useful representation of human societies and minds. But,
Yeah.
but given that, I guess we have to be careful not to call everything a meme. So can you give us an example to show us the difference between, I don't know, say learned behavioral patterns and replicated memes? I think skiing is one of your favorite examples. Maybe we could use that.
Oh, I'm guessing, I'm not sure how much longer. I want to go skiing this year with my daughter. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep skiing at 73. Well, my legs are still working. I hope I will. But you're right. The point about that, why I use that example, is because you can learn mimetically, if you like, the principles of parallel turns and whatever. The whole business of skiing is a meme. Everything passed on in culture is a meme. So the fact that the mountains are covered with, ecologically disastrous ski lifts and so on, that's all been passed on through culture. But when you learn to ski or ride a bike or snowboard or surfing or even driving a car, nobody can do that for you. They can tell you, okay, not point down here, you probably crash, but they can tell you how to, keep the weight on the lower ski or whatever it is. They can tell you things. Those are memes. But in the end, it's your muscles and your brain that is learning by practice physically. And you can't pass that on. You can talk about it. You can't pass it on directly. That's your brain learning with your legs and your arms and everything else, that skill. So if we look around in culture generally, I mean, I'm looking over there at my wood burner with a fire. Now you can tell people, and come back to fires, you can tell people how to light a fire, but I've seen so many people who have not a clue how to light a fire or to keep it going. My husband always laughs about some of my son's friends who came here, and they thought they could put a match to a log and it would light. So, people can tell you, but again, you have to have a lot of experience with bonfires, with wood burners, whatever else it is, and those skills. So, sorry, I'm going on too long about this, but it's important. The skills you learn on your own, other animals can learn. They can learn to ski. I was brilliant research recently on uh, rats liking to drive cars. They give them little tiny cars that they can kind of steer, and the rats love it. And when they get let out of their cage, they run to the car and jump on it. They love it. That's not memetic. They are learning how to control this thing.
So, for example, if I sit there and I read the encyclopedia, that's memetic knowledge because I'm just taking their word for it. Whereas if I have to go out and actually work out if it's true for myself, that's not memetics.
Yeah, exactly. That if you're working out something complicated for yourself in language, you have learnt the words, you've learnt the ways to think because you went to school, and that's all memetic. They're completely intricately mixed up, but the principle is clear. Something you've acquired from somebody else is a meme, and that's that floating out there in culture. But things that you learn by yourself and for yourself are not. And loads of other species can do all those kinds of learning, physical actions, responses to things, operant conditioning, classical conditioning, all of those things. Loads of even insects and very simple organisms can do learning of those kinds, but only a few species can imitate and therefore build up culture.
Okay, so the skis example shows us that all inventions are also memes. The skis example, right? The skis themselves are memes, the invention. So the more successful ones last. But interestingly, you point out that it's often the meme itself or the memeplex itself that tends to benefit from that success far more, perhaps, than the genes or the mind of the receiving and transmitting host. And this is the starting point for one of your main concerns about memetics, that the success of the meme is not necessarily its benefit to us, the sort of host species, if you like, Can you explain this concern here of memes somehow taking on their own sort of self-interest, a bit like a parasite exploiting its host? Perhaps you can give us a sort of example that might help us to see how the meme is sort of operating separately from the host.
Well, the parasite is only one example. Not all memes are parasites, but some are. But starting from the basic principle of replicators, you mentioned the word replicator, which I should probably explain, that genes are a replicator because they are the information that is copied with variation and selection, that algorithm. And memes are the second replicator. So the basic principle of replicator theory within biology is not absolutely universally accepted, but it's a very general theory within biology to treat genes as selfish replicators. So genes are selfish in the sense that they get themselves copied, not in any way for the happiness of the organisms that they create. They will get copied if they can, for whatever reason they get copied. And that's why we're surrounded by all the things, in nature that we are. And the same applies to memes. They are selfish replicators. Now, if you are a bit of information, like a sentence, like an activity, like a way of wearing clothes or whatever, if you are something that's being passed on, the question then becomes, how do you, as a meme, get passed on? And here's the critical answer to your question, because some memes are passed on because they're good or true or beautiful or for nice reasons. They benefit us in some way. So we wouldn't call those parasites, but it's exactly the same process. Other memes are passed on even though they are not of any benefit to us. Some are of
Example?
benefit.
Random example?
Well, I think of religions. I have a pretty um, uh, skeptical view of religions and of the harm they do. I mean, they do some good. And if you look at most religions, the big God religions, they started out as a benefit to the genes. So what you find in Christianity, Islam, Judaism, all these, treat women as objects, keep them under control so that the men can have control over getting their genes passed on by those women. All these horrible things, veils and keeping women and marriage rules and so on, are advantage to the genes, and that's how they started out. Now, as we go on, and a lot of people are getting less religious, and we have the whole concept of human rights. Human rights are not to the benefit of genes. Human rights say equality of the sexes. Human rights leads to things like birth control, abortion. I know that Christianity, American Christianity, is so anti-abortion, anti-divorce, pro-family values, and all of that, which is gene-based. Whereas societies, a lot of Western societies, free societies, have moved towards the women have rights over their own body, which reduces the gene replication rate. Once you've got really good birth control and women can decide whether they want children or not, it drops. Atheists produce far fewer children than believers. So, we're heading towards it not being of advantage to the genes. That's perhaps an extreme example, but a lot of untrue memes spread. Well, intellectually, I gave the example of quantum theory being so popular in consciousness studies. That's not doing anyone any good because those theories really don't work. They don't lead to any good predictions, and the people involved in them don't even understand what quantum theory is. But those memes spread because it kind of has this nice ring about it.
Mm.
Lots of sort of dangerous sports are huge fun, and they spread because they're exciting and fun. People die. You can think up all kinds of examples or take something really depressing with the spread of conspiracy theories. Why do conspiracy theories spread? Well, they have some appeal to people that actually they're not true, and they harm people to believe things that are not true. So take anti-vax, and it's so frightening and dreadful that in positions of power in the United States into the new administration are people who are anti-vaxxers. Now, those memes spread even though they are to the disadvantage of all sorts of people. There have been so many deaths in Italy from measles because people not allowing their children to be vaccinated for measles, and so loads and loads of young kids die, and some go blind, and they live but they go blind. Um, tell me to shut up, for goodness sake. I can go on and on. Access
Well, no, but it's
principle. Memes spread for their own benefit. They spread sometimes by being good, true, useful, beautiful, and they sometimes spread despite not being any of those things, but for other reasons. And that's the balance that we're always trying to strike in human culture, to try and actually choose the memes that are true and that are good for us, but we don't always succeed.
Absolutely. And I think the word, this interesting word you brought up there of compelling, it's like if it can somehow give us a sense of peace on something that we don't have an answer to,
Yeah.
Whether it be inequality or injustice or the abuse of power by the rich or something like that, we will find some way to get some peace on it, even if not necessarily finding something that we can confirm to be true, and that can distort the future of knowledge. Okay, so all of this makes perfect sense to our herd mentality and to our sort of cultural consensus of knowledge. So why this taboo around the word? I mean, many social scientists just scoff at the term memes, but I can kind of understand the confusion now in the internet age, because people might just think that memes are just trending internet images and phrases. But this prejudice started way before all of that, when you first proposed it. Why and how did this prejudice begin?
I don't know how it began, but I can think about some of the reasons involved. And don't say that I invented the idea of memes, because I didn't. It was Richard Dawkins in The Selfish Gene. Hence, we're back to selfish replicators.
Important reference, listeners.
Yeah,
It does, of
exactly.
course, was first meant.
1976. And why hasn't that, in 50 years, why hasn't memetics taken off as the most important science? Very interesting. One reason might be because it's actually useless and does not help us to make good predictions, and it's a jolly good thing that it hasn't taken off. That's one possibility. Others are that people are afraid of it. And another thing is that people don't understand it. So the not understanding one, a lot of people don't understand the basic principle of selfish information. If you reduce everything to information, then you get called a reductionist. You're a reductionist, and that's bad. Why is that bad? Because people tend to think that when science is reductionist, it's sort of not allowing for love and peace and all the kind of human things they care about. That isn't necessarily true. Reduction is um, can be done wrong, but is fundamental in science to try and get down to the basics before you can understand the more complex things. So that's one kind of fear about it. Another is, I've explained here, and so have you, the evolutionary algorithm, this obvious fact that Darwin saw. And people are really scared that everything comes down to just information, that we could just be a product of competing information. People want to be, and that's another whole story. Why? Want to be an inner being, a self who was born for some reason, who will live through their life and then continue after death. And this kind of understanding that we're just bodies made of competing information that happen to succeed seems to take away the magic. Well, for me, it doesn't take away the magic. It seems even more magical that it all comes down to that. But I can see that. It's also frightening to think of ideas that people really value as having been the winners in a competition like this. But I should say that alongside memetics, there is a lot of research now, and this is quite recent, the last 20 years probably. Sorry, to me, being old, 20 years is not very long. But um, there is research in cultural evolution which does not use memetics. So there are, I mean, near me down in Cornwall, there's many researchers doing brilliant research on, and there's many in the States as well, on cultural evolution, understanding how culture spreads and so on. And they do not use memetics to explain things. Why not? Because, well, the main reason is they say that cultural items, which they prefer to call them rather than memes, cultural items or culture gens, they've got other names, are not replicators. They don't see culture as selfishly evolving. They see it as evolving, but not in the way that memetics does, as selfish information evolving for its own sake. So those are just some of the reasons that I think that memetics has not taken off.
Well,
I'd
thank
just
you.
like here to mention one experiment. You see, because there are so few people doing memetics, and there are probably only half a dozen of us in the world, there's none of this research going on. Whereas within academia, there's lots and lots of research on the other kinds of cultural evolution. So yet again, I'm stuck out on the fringe with something that's unpopular in proper science. But this a study was a study by two people in Brussels, Hofhuis and Boudry, of the medieval witch trials. And they did a historical study into this. People had wondered why all the horrible things to do with witches, all the ideas about the Sabbaths and flying on broomsticks and corrupting the religious views, and then all the things that, ducking stools and pricking witches to see if they had a spot that didn't feel pain, all the horrendous things. These spread throughout Western Europe quite fast, and thousands of people were murdered, tortured, mostly women, not exclusively, but mostly. Why did this spread? So there were some obvious theories put about in the historical research, that it was all good for the people who, the cardinals and what have you, the Spanish Inquisition, if you're a Monty Python. The Inquisitors, maybe they benefit. Maybe in some way the villages or the towns benefited. Maybe, whatever. Clearly the genes didn't benefit because so many women were killed. But they did an exhaustive study and showed very cleverly that the memes were what succeeded. Selfish memes, because this appealed in that religious climate. This appealed to people to think there were witches. It gave them kids an opportunity to get famous by going, she's a witch, she's a witch, and even kids were involved. So there were lots of memetic reasons why this spread, even though they showed it was harmful to the cardinals and people and the inquisitors. They didn't actually benefit. A lot of them suffered mentally terribly. The villages were devastated, cultures torn apart, people died. And that's a really, really awful example of how memes succeed, even though they're not good either for the genes or for the people who propagate them.
Now, on to the second part of the conversation, moving on to technology. Before we get into how memetic replication relates to psychology in a post-social media world, we must first introduce another of your more recent ideas along the same line, that of a third level of replication that wasn't in the original book, Tremes. The ever-increasing digitalization of all the content on in our internet age has led to this sort of new replication across the internet, which you've nicknamed Tremes. Tell us briefly how they're different from normal memes and why your previous sort of parasite concern in human mind replicated memes is even more pronounced in algorithm-led replications.
Yeah, well, it was an idea that kind of percolated, that I was having for a long time before I decided to give it a name and think that there is a third replicator. So I suppose this began about, God, it was 2007, I think. I was invited to contribute to a NASA book on cultural evolution in the cosmos. And I thought, what's that mean? Why are they asking me? What a weird thing, And I went for a walk with my daughter one day, long hike. And I began thinking about this. And I thought, this planet has genes. I'm thinking about the cosmos. Dawkins would say this too. Dawkins said that anywhere in the universe, Darwin's evolutionary algorithm will operate. Things will evolve by natural selection. And I began to think about planets that would have genes or the equivalent. They might be completely different, but some kind of thing that would allow biology to evolve. And then if they started to imitate behaviors and so on and evolve language and so on, that would be a second replicator. And I began to think about what we're doing now, which is very recent. I mean, really, the last 100 years, less, 75 years, I suppose, is we've given over a lot of the replication to the machinery that we've produced. So all the phones, laptops, computers, servers, all of these are busily copying with variation and selection. They've got that they store information with incredibly high fidelity. You know, they don't make mistakes. It's very, very accurate copying. And I began to think about, well, is this different from memes? And in the end, I concluded that it was different. What does it take to be a new replicator? It takes the ability to do all of those three processes, copying with varying and selection, without human intervention, done by the machines we've created. Now, is that happening? When I first had this idea, and I wrote this chapter for the book, and I gave a TED lecture in 2008 on this topic, I was saying that potentially these digital machinery could do all the copying, varying, and selecting themselves without us. But it wasn't happening then, I thought. And I don't think there's an exact moment when it happened, but it clearly is now. I mean, even something simple like a Google search, the software is going out there, finding the stuff and giving it to you. It's copying information from the whole everything that's out there, selecting some bits to give to you, given that you've asked the question. So that still involves a human being. But once you have got software picking other software, which is happening with AI now and language models and so on, it's picking, it's doing the copying, it's doing the variations of the copying by mixing other stuff up to make a new, like an LLM would do, taking stuff from elsewhere and mixing it all up in a new way. So it's creative in that sense, not like a human sense, but it's creative. And that's passing on some, and some get selected more than others. So I decided if all those three things were happening, that really constitutes a third replicator. So going back to evolution in the cosmos, cultural evolution in the cosmos, my idea was that if you think about all the planets out there, well, a huge number of them, and we know so many exoplanets now that we didn't know quite recently. There will be lots and lots and lots that have developed a first replicator, some kind of life evolving, some kind of biology, some kind of, organisms covering the planet. There'll be not very many, rather a few, that then some of those organisms start to copy behaviors. So what's happened there? You've got a first replicator that produces some kind of organism, and that organism does a new sort of copying. And that's the second replicator. Then there'll be even fewer that when that happens, those products, the first replicator, will create new products, in our case, computers and servers and phones and stuff, that have a new sort of copying. And there may be some more out there in the universe that we don't know about because we can't see far enough and we don't know enough. But the principle would be when you get to the third replicator stage, something new has happened. And I'm sorry to say, I think that's pretty scary because I think what's happening on this planet is because we've done that, we are even much more than we were before, exploiting the resources of this planet and wrecking its climate. And to leap ahead, maybe if that's happening elsewhere, well, maybe that's why we haven't heard from people out there because it's too dangerous. But that's going off on another
the old Fermi paradox, definitely
exactly
worth considering self-destruction along the evolution through technological sort of mastery.
I would replace the Drake equation as the why trying to solve the Fermi paradox with a different equation, which is just let's look at how many planets have got a first replicator, how many have got a second, how many a third. That's when we would get to the danger point. If you take this line of thinking, but I may be completely batty, and a lot of people think it is. So, but
what's the Drake equation?
It's asking how many planets there are that are suitable for life, and how many of those ones that are suitable for life would get intelligent life, and how many of the ones that got intelligent life would have the kind of culture we have, and so on. And I'm replacing those questions about intelligence and all of that with replicators, and thinking that what really counts is which kind of replicators and how many levels of replicators building on one after the other any planet has.
Now, social media algorithms are a particular case in point here,
Yeah.
as they literally assess the probability of replication in this constant feedback loop between human minds and digital content,
Yeah.
further replicating the popular content on these sort of suggestion pages. And this feedback loop leads to replication frenzies that we call viral content. Now, the problem is that the algorithm doesn't have any moral compass about what
Correct.
it's replicating. It doesn't care. It's just designed to maximize engagement, which is yet another example of this kind of parasite analogy, extracting its
Exactly.
goal with no concern for the well-being of the host, in this case, the public using those social media platforms. How does your Treme concern sort of plug in to this whole debate about social media AI algorithms and their effect on human well-being and culture? Bear in mind here, listeners, AI, the general public's first interface with AI basically is social media algorithms. So it's quite funny that this is our first experiment on a large scale. And I mean, how do Tremes plug in here?
You say it's our first experiment. It's not really ours. I mean, we have let loose this phenomenon without really intending to. If we set about doing it deliberately, it would be very different. And we haven't. Sorry, I've lost the plot of what the question was in the first place.
So, how does your Treme concern kind of connect to the whole debate about AI, social media algorithms, and their effect on human well-being?
Largely because of the speed. You see, similar things were happening before. If you think back to Dawkins' original invention of the idea of memes, he talked about chain letters. Now, most of your listeners are probably too young to have actually had chain letters, but I remember them very well, where you would get a letter that says, if you copy this letter 10 times and pass it to all your friends and you send a stamp, or you will get hundreds of stamps back and you'll get rich. And so, you would write this thing out by hand, because we didn't have any photocopiers or anything like that. So you had to write out 10 copies by hand and send them on to people. And then they had to send a stamp worth something, or a picture, or something, whatever it was they had to do. And these would proliferate because you're doing each person's doing 10. And then they would just fizzle out because the thing was saturated and people would realize that it was a con. It's like a pyramid scheme, basically.
Yeah, network marketing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so we've gone from that, which could never get very far or very harmful to people, and it took ages because you had to put the thing in the post and it would take 2 days to get there, and whatever. And it's gone so fast now. This is what's scary about it, because so many people can get the information within moments. TikTok, or even WhatsApp or whatever. They can get it very fast. People are under huge pressure to react quickly. I mean, I don't know about you, but I even succumb to this. I have this sort of feeling that I ought to respond very quickly to certain kinds of messages that come in. And I keep telling myself, wait, no, you can do this tomorrow. But there's a sort of, people will like me if I respond very quickly, and so on. And that pressure causes us to just click on things that immediately catch our eye, catch our emotions, whatever. Our emotions are being driven by this. And this is particularly dangerous and horrible, that when we're doing things too fast, our bodies are not designed to do that. When we get excited by something, it can be absolutely irrelevant to our survival and to the reason why we have this ability to be excited by something. Another example is the way we pass on horrible things. I mean, I'm turning onto the darker side of this now.
Well, it's negativity bias. It actually comes from a good place. It comes from our need to survive and to look for dangerous things. It doesn't come from a bad place. It's just having bad effects in this algorithmic
It,
feedback loop.
it doesn't come from a bad place, but it has bad consequences. And one of the aspects of this negativity bias is if you hear some horrible story about something or another, you kind of feel a bit better if you share it with somebody. You know, you hear a horrible story and you don't want to be alone thinking about that was so awful. So you'll tell somebody, and that maybe makes you feel a bit better. You're not alone with it. And that's a horrible reason why really nasty things can spread, quite apart from the excitement and the thrill and the whatever.
I've actually been teaching a whole bunch of lessons today about conflict management, and I've been using the threat system in the nervous system to describe why it's so difficult to contain conflicts, because once we've been driven past that threshold, we're not actually able to reason because the threat system has taken over agency. And in that sense, you really can't do anything in those situations. And often there was a terrible scandal at Facebook recently, where I think it was 5 years ago now, 4 years ago, where a whistleblower said that they had been prioritizing negative, scandalous sort of response-driven posts about 8 times more than positive posts. And
Yeah,
they'd
yeah.
done this having seen very clearly that the data that people engaged more with scary negative posts. And I think this is a perfect example of how the platforms are feeding this. If it was just the algorithm noticing that was good for engagement, but this has been permitted by those platforms.
And there are a lot of other psychological processes going on here. Sometimes people who have suffered a lot as kids or lived in violent environments and so on actually like watching horrific movies and other horrible things because it kind of makes them feel better by comparison, which is another horrible process going on. There are many processes like this that spread the nastiness. And in a way, you know, ghost movies and, you know, certain kinds of horror movies are not really doing much harm, but others really normalize really horrific things. But coming back to the speed, all this has always happened. There have always been, you know, horrible novels about scary stuff, you know, Frankenstein and, you know, whatever, a long time ago. But they spread very slowly. We've always had conflict. But when you can slow things down, so the biological response, the adrenaline and all the fight, flight stuff and so on, kicks in. In the modern world, we're going, dum, 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 and we haven't time to let it settle down. But if you are in a conflict with a friend or a spouse or something or other, if you can take a deep breath and calm down and let the thing, you know, very often you can go, okay, what's this really about? Can we think about it? And but with the modern technology that we're talking about, there isn't time. It's all too fast, and a lot of us are living perpetually overexcited, not sleeping well. People, on the whole, in modern societies, are not sleeping enough, and that raises the stress levels. All these things are contributing to extreme psychological unhealthiness. Now, I'm not that sort of psychologist, but I can observe, and I read some of the research and so on. I can observe how mental health is deteriorating in these very fast moving societies.
Mm.
People in much poorer societies who don't have all these advantages of all this technology can often be very much happier than are we lot who are constantly battling with the overload of all this stuff.
Okay. Now, I know you've also written about the now not so distant future of artificial general intelligence and beyond that towards superintelligence. I'm sure you've also been following, listeners, the fascinating ChatGPT story of emergent properties that none of the developers had predicted or could really understand, and it was their baby. What are the implications of your third replicator when we imagine an independent, powerful, and strongly emergent, totally unpredictable AI system of the future?
Well, what you've said there is exactly what I think about. If if I'm right that it's useful to think about it in terms of a third replicator, then it is way out of our control already. I mean, if you take ideas like Nick Bostrom and many other people who are saying, well, we have to make sure that the AI is working for our benefit and so on. And I'm thinking, you can't. It's a selfish replicator. Oh, we can nudge it. We can help. We're not totally helpless. We can say, this is what's for our benefit. Let's try and make it go that way. But this is an evolving system, evolving for its own benefit. That's one of the main reasons that I think that this idea of thinking about it as a third replicator is valuable. But I must stress that very, very few people in the world think this way or think that I'm right about that. I don't want your listeners, viewers, at all to think that this is a great new theory that's becoming, famous. It's not. People don't seem to want to think that way. But I think thinking of it as a third replicator shows why it's out of control, shows why ChatGPT and all the other LLMs they're creative in the sense that I've described of the three-step algorithm. They're taking all that stuff out there. They've scraped all this everything that they can get off the web, and we authors are trying to stop them taking our materials to put into these the baseline for all the stuff that they're getting off the web, and then they can mix it up, which is what you have to do. Copy with variation. You make a new mixture and so on, and it's way off. Now it's not yet, I wonder, creative in the way of humans. I mean, humans will come up with musical things that are quite different, and so far that's not happened. The answers to questions that you put to ChatGPT can be pretty clunky, but they're very interesting. But I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows whether it's just a matter of time when they'll become as creative as us. And if you think about something like the artificial intelligent Go player, the game Go, that made a move that no human would have thought of. Well, that's what they say. I used to play Go, but I'm not any good at it. It's a very fascinating and difficult game, but at least I know what they're talking about. And they said that no human would have made that move. It was bizarre, and yet it won using that move. That's the kind of creativity, and that's the creative process. That's the ultimate creative process, is the competition between bits of information to be copied. And so I think it is this really depressing, but I don't know. I don't think there's any hope of us controlling AI. We can we can we can manipulate it to some extent. We can try to hold it back. We can try and inject our own benefits in it, but we should not think that it's a toy that's under our control, because it isn't. It's a
Well,
self-evolving system.
obviously, AI safety is something we're going to be covering on the show. And listeners, great news. We've got Stephen Wolfram coming back on to speak about AI. Obviously, as probably the ultimate computer geek, Stephen Wolfram is going to be, I hope, giving us a more sort of positive outlook, because obviously there are a lot of scare stories out there. Okay, so
Good. Well, I look forward to it, because I'd like some more positive views to convey.
so as we head towards a close, Sue, I just want to widen the lens to think about technology in general by asking your opinion about a point at the end of Martin Heidegger's essay, The Question Concerning Technology, which came up here on the show. And I have to confess, I haven't read. I can't read his work. It's just too dense for me.
It's difficult, yes.
So
Absolutely.
highly simplified, listeners, really, really simplified here. The warning he makes at the end of this essay is that the threat from technology is not from the machines themselves, but rather from us seeing them merely as tools that we choose to use for certain tasks that we need them for. Now, while that is true, it's that truth that has blinded us to this deeper truth, that the current technology we use to, I don't know, farm, to cure people, to travel, to produce stuff, etc., it also scaffolds our current worldview, as he uses it. Scaffolds is the word he uses.
Yeah.
So in some sense, our understanding of the truth is completely dependent upon the technological window through which we've explored it, and on the technology we use to actually measure it and collect data. And it reminds me that technology is basically an extension of the body. And it always has been, ever since the use of the bone in 2001 so the ape can kill his competitor.
And at the beginning of Barbie.
No, I haven't seen it yet. Don't no spoilers, please.
No, it's they're smashing the dolls just like at the beginning of 2001. It's brilliant.
I can't wait. I'm gonna go watch that tonight.
You must. Go on.
It's always been a feedback loop with our evolution. So what's the takeaway from Heidegger's warning in light of how vulnerable we now find ourselves to AI's objectives becoming misaligned with human objectives?
If it were clear what human objectives are, and if we as societies actually had good objectives in mind, I could answer the question. But look at what we do. We're a bunch of selfish creatures driven by selfish replicators that really don't know what's in our best interest. I mean, to take back a money can't buy you love sort of, thing, people strive for money. Our current government, which is pretty much a disaster at the moment, and well, it doesn't matter which government, constantly trying to get people to think that they're not going to raise taxes and that people can get more money, when we know that what makes people happy is not having more money, unless you're really poor and you haven't got the basics. It is having a society, having people around you that care about you, having good neighbors, having interesting jobs to do that you enjoy, and you come home having actually felt you'd done a useful job. All these basic things are what make people happy and what makes societies happy. And yet we all just try to get more money and buy more stuff. And buying more stuff means depleting the environment more and wrecking the planet. So, that makes me feel, why do we end up in this hopeless point in this discussion? Because I do feel kind of there, I feel a bit hopeless, but I'm not a hopeless person. The trouble is, I think we're wrecking the planet and it's really terrible and we can see why it's happening and we're not doing the things we need to do. And we ought to, but we can't. And I fear for my children and my grandchildren in the future. But I'm not despondent. I get on with my life and I enjoy talking to you and I enjoy trying to understand all these difficult things and wondering where these ideas go. I think we can not be despondent, but my answer is a kind of hopeless one, really. We are
I think in some ways
species.
this ever-present technology right from the start, from the most basic tools we talked about at the beginning, using rocks to cut stuff and remove skins. I mean, that technology from the very earliest stage was hand in hand with our cultural evolution, feeding directly back into it. And I think we have to be honest, our technology is causing a huge extra load on the Earth's resources. Not only the amount of humans we have to look after and the amount of animals we have to feed, but also the amount of machines we have to power and the amount of industries we have to push for markets which are often overinflated and the products don't even get used. But it is related, this question, to capitalism. So I have to get one last question in, sir, and then I'll let you go. I know you've also been reading Max Tegmark on AI, and he's one of my great heroes in this debate. Perhaps you and maybe the listeners have been following the success of the Future of Life Institute's open letter, signed by thousands of AI safety specialists, calling for a pause in large language model development like ChatGPT-4 until we have the laws in place to protect from this famous alignment problem that Sue was talking about earlier, this need to align our interests with the interests of the program itself. I also know you've had a lot of conversations about the role of capitalism in driving this crazy runaway train of technological innovation, sort of blind push. Now, Tegmark uses a wonderful analogy when he discusses the future of AI being pushed so blindly forwards without these necessary laws in this mindless, what he calls a race to the bottom, which he's likening a little bit to a nuclear arms race. No surprise that the three big existential threats in the world are nuclear war, climate change, and AI. Now, he uses the analogy of Moloch, the Old Testament idol, in Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl, which is a criticism of capitalist greed, materialism, and obviously the hypocrisy of that. Tegmark explains that this race to the bottom doesn't really benefit anybody, not neither the shareholders of the corporations that have accumulated all that capital, nor the poor workers who are trapped in this web of debt to those corporations. Nobody's going to benefit from a nuclear war or from an AI gone wrong scenario, only Moloch. And this reminded me of your concern about this kind of parasitic memes benefiting more than any human being. Is there a connection, Sue, between Ginsberg's Moloch allegory of a sort of soulless corporation sucking out all of human value, Tegmark's fear of capitalism hastening this complete loss of control over our society to AI,
Yep.
and your third replicator in Tremes?
Yep. My answer is a very simple yes. The power of selfish replicators, the power of selfish information that will get copied whenever it can, regardless of the consequences. And those consequences are the ones you have described. So, simple answer, yep.
Okay, well, Sue Blackmore, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating to get into memes with you. I know we've talked about it each time we've spoken and never quite managed to get it on air. So, Sue Blackmore, thank you so much for your time. Speak soon.
Thank you. I mean, it's great to have a chat. I would love to go on longer, but